In this video, I'm going to show you how you can configure EIGRP Router ID when we have classic EIGRP configuration and also named EIGRP configuration. You know that we should configure EIGRP Router ID in all routers with the different router IDs. You know that EIGRP Router ID by default may be selected with the IP address of the highest loopback interface, or if the loopback interface is not available, the highest IP address of non-loopback interface. But you can configure the router ID yourself. For example, in this scenario, without configuration of router ID, because we don't have any loopback interface, the highest IP address in each router will be the router ID. In router 1, the router ID will be 10.121, okay, because this is the only and highest IP address that we have in this router. You can use show IP protocols to verify the router ID. Here we have the EIGRP router ID 10.121. In the router 2, show IP protocol can show us that the router ID is 10.232 because this is the highest IP address in this router, and also in the router 3, show IP protocols can show us the router ID is 10.233. Now I'm going to configure router ID myself. Look at here, this is the step 1, draw the topology in EVNG. Step 2, interface IP address assignment and no shutdown command in all routers. Step 3, configure classic EIGRP in R1 and R2. And step 4, configure named EIGRP in R3. We did all of them previously. Now in step 5, we want to configure EIGRP router ID in R1, R2 and R3, and the router ID should be x.x.x.x, and x is the router number. For example, for router 1 we will use quad 1, for router 2 quad 2, and for router 3 quad 3. The configuration of router ID when you are using classic configuration is so easy. EIGRP router ID a.b.c.d. Let me to show you here. In the router 1, configure terminal, router EIGRP1, EIGRP router ID 1.1.1.1. That's it. You don't need to do any other things. Automatically neighborship will tear down, and also we will see the change in router ID. Let me to show you show IP protocols. Here now the EIGRP router ID is quad 1, as you can see. And after that, in the router 2, let me to show you the router EIGRP1, EIGRP router ID is quad 2, for example. Don't forget, you shouldn't configure same router ID between two, actually in one topology or between two direct connected routers. And finally, in the router 3, when you are using the named mode configuration, you need to configure router ID under the, for example, address family IPv4 unicast autonomous system AS number. Let me to show you. It is so easy. Again, the command is same. Configure terminal, router EIGRP lab, address family IPv4 unicast AS number 1, and here EIGRP router ID, for example, quad 3. That's it. This is the configuration of EIGRP router ID. Show IP protocols can show us now the router ID is quad 3 in this router. In the router 2, show IP protocols can show us that the router ID is quad 2. Because of that, now we can configure EIGRP router ID manually. You know that this method has highest preference between the three method. The first method and the highest priority method is the configuration of router ID with manual configuration, like this scenario. The second method is the highest IP address of the loopback interface, and if the loopback interface is not available, the highest IP address of non-loopback interface will be the router ID in EIGRP.